Today, I'm delighted to have someone who knows what they're talking about SEO. So, Kevin Gibbons is founding director at Signal, a specialist e-commerce SEO agency that drives organic search growth for clients. Their impressive client list includes Under Armour, FatFace, ASICS, and lots more. Kevin frequently writes and speaks within the search industry and posts regularly on LinkedIn about SEO changes and future trends. And for that reason, I wanted to invite him on to have just a kind of informal chat about what the hell's going on. So, Kevin, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, great to be here, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on as well. So um, I'm not going to pretend I have 100% all of the answers, but I can certainly share some of our findings and some of maybe the gaps of where things may or may not go as well.
Oh, well, that's very humble of you because I know how much you are talking about this topic, but it's probably like all of us at the moment, Kevin, that things are moving so fast. So, no, I'm delighted that you're here. So, let's kind of get straight into your thoughts on this. How has just stepping back from it, because there's probably listeners that maybe don't know a lot about SEO, don't know about the changes. So, if we just do a big picture, how has AI changed SEO? And particularly the role of the SEO agency.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think if you were to look at where we are today, um, how much has it changed the role of an SEO agency to date? I think it has, but it's minimal, and I think there'll be some agencies where the answer will be it hasn't changed that much, and I think there'll be some agencies where it'll say they've changed everything. But I think the reality is it's probably somewhere in between where everyone's still trying to figure it out right now. It's kind of a case of we're all aware that this is still largely in its infancy in terms of where it could go. So if we're to think about what does this look like in even 2 or 3 years, let alone 5 or 10, I think everyone is of the opinion that this feels big. Um, in terms of what can you and should you be doing today, everyone's figuring it out and doing different things. So yeah, I think that's the key point at this stage.
Right. So, what are the sort of conversations perhaps you're having with clients? Are they curious about how this is disrupting things? Because we've got this kind of curious set of circumstances where the world is changing, our clients are kind of trying to keep up, we're trying to stay ahead. So, there's this kind of race at the moment. But what kinds of conversations are you having with your clients at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting where the types of things we're talking to our clients about right now are just, I would see this as there's a couple of ways of looking at AI. So, two ways in particular being one, what are the search engines doing? So, and by search engines, I think it's an interesting time where, so I started SEO myself in 2003. At that point in time, Google was founded in 98. By 2003, from memory at least, Google were pretty much dominant market leader. They'd taken over the likes of like AskGees, Lycos, all of the players that you had back there. And I think since then, you can say your SEO strategy has been very much a Google first world, of which you might have Bing and Yahoo and some other search engines in terms of different levels of popularity, but it's really been focus on Google and the rest takes care of itself to a large extent, really for 20 plus years. And I think the interesting thing now is for the first time in a long time, you have different players in the market and you have different types of search. So I think going back a step, for me, it's always worth looking at user and searcher behavior. So if people are using different platforms, whether that's an LLM, so the likes of Perplexity, ChatGTP, Grok through Twitter and all stuff like that, or X, um, that's a competitive threat, if you like, to Google, and it's a different platform for a user. So if people are using that, then you should be paying attention. If people aren't using that, then yeah, that's something that probably isn't so much of a concern because sure, it's got some usage, but it's not popular enough to divert your attention away from. Um, I think the way that we're talking to our clients is you get different types of searches. So you would get your traditional organic search, you'll now get an AI-based search, and obviously within Google that's the same thing. So quite often those results will be merged together. You'll get an AI snippet for a result alongside your organic listings. You get retail search. A lot of people will go to Amazon directly. Um, you get social search. People will go to YouTube. I mean, I remember 10, 15 years ago, everyone talking about YouTube being the world's second biggest search engine and all of that side of things. You've got TikTok. So again, on the social side, it's another way that people will find you. And there's so much more that, again, that comes into the measurement of some of it's brand awareness. They watch a video or a reel on social. They could be finding a snippet that mentions your brand, and that all comes into the customer journey and how someone may or may not buy a product. Um, the old way of measuring that was very much if you've got traffic to your website and a conversion, then that's great. If you haven't, then don't worry about it. Whereas now, actually, you have to worry about some of the stuff that you might have to find different ways to measure it, or you might have to accept you just can't measure that at all, but it should still play into your strategy. So I think the first thing I would recommend is just understanding the landscape and how that's shifting. Um, and then what I was explaining before in terms of the two different areas of AI. So area number one is you've got different platforms at play, so how people are searching on those different platforms. The second point is how you use AI as an agency in order to probably provide efficiencies at this stage. And I think we'll come on to this in terms of the roles that are most important within an agency, but AI being very much about how you can make your workflows and processes more efficient in terms of what you're doing. And the conversations that we're having with our clients are how to navigate all of that, really.
Really? Okay, so that's interesting. Is that clients that specifically have got the responsibility for their SEO strategy, or what kind of level are you speaking to? CMOs? Because I know you work with a lot of enterprise level clients
Yeah.
who typically in a client organization is kind of responsible for making these changes.
Well, it's really interesting because I think with SEO, I said for a long time, SEO isn't a priority until it goes wrong. That's when it gets to the board level. You kind of have a CMO, if you like, will normally delegate responsibility for SEO. I've seen exceptions to this where there's a large percentage of traffic and revenue that comes through SEO. So like 80, 90% of their business might be built around it, in which case that sits at the board level, it has to. But in a lot of cases, I think marketing directors, CMOs are happy to delegate that down in terms of the team that manages that. And if you're growing year on year, that's great. Keep going. I think where you get, like I say, SEO isn't a priority until it's a problem is sometimes things go wrong. And then that becomes kind of almost like mission critical in terms of what you need to fix. I think the other side of it, again, would be when stuff's changing. So there's shifting sands. We've actually, and can't name any names, but we're undergoing a project at the moment, which is around helping a client review what the future might hold for them. So they're performing very well right now, but their concern isn't the next 6 to 12 months, is actually the next kind of year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. Is there something that they should be looking at right now that if they don't look at it, someone else is going to come along and beat them? So it's trying to be prepared for that side of things is more important, I would say, than it probably ever has been.
So talk us through that scenario actually, because that's probably lots of agencies that are thinking about approaching their clients right now. Do you have like a specific process for mapping out, we're here, but within three years we could be here, and therefore these are the key elements you need to look at? Well, how would you talk us through that process?
I think at this stage, you have to make assumptions. And you have to look at potential scenarios that could play out because, like I say, at the moment, it feels like if you look at the AI technology that is in play, it does feel a bit like the early 2000s of Google are trying to get market share. They're worry about how to monetize this search engine once people start using it. So again, going back to user behavior, capture the users first, and then you can monetize it afterwards. I think you're seeing quite a lot of competitiveness and investment in trying to go for that land grab right now of ChatGTP, Perplexity, Google, and everything behind that. Of if they can be the AI engine of choice, then there'll certainly be ways they can monetize that further down the line. But if you don't have the users on board, then it's just not going to play out in that way for them. So I think there's, at this stage, almost being agnostic to which platform that is and open to, this could be any one of them that's the leader. And the chances are that might be going to have to optimize for multiple platforms. I think it's really interesting. And I think just going back a step of, it's always a good exercise from a marketing perspective to put yourself in the customer's shoes. So, and I'm sure you talk to people about this all the time, but we can solve complicated problems that we think are problems that are not actually the real customers in the first place. So understanding who are the demographics of the customers that are looking for your product or service, and what are the ways in which they currently find you, and what are the ways in which they may currently find you in the future. I did a LinkedIn post 3 or 4 weeks ago around how I just used Perplexity to research and book a holiday. And to me, I think it's stuff like that, those use cases of, okay, well, I can see how this is useful today because I can drill down in terms of where to go in the summer in Europe, through to different criteria of, I want a hotel versus a villa, or compare the pros and cons, like those types of things. I think that's very useful today. So I think straight away, if you're in travel, that's something you should be aware of. I think what you should also be aware of is, where is that going in future? So I saw a very good talk at Fest in Edinburgh last year by Tom Anthony, who's from Search Pilot, and he spoke about how in the future personalization will come into this as well. So at the moment, AI is, if you search my example of a holiday for a family in Europe this summer, you'll get quite generic advice of the top hotels and the top destinations to stay. In the future, that might be linked to your mobile phone data that plugs into your BA app or whatever it could be, that says, this is where you've been before, this is what you liked, this is what you didn't like, these are the, you have a family of four, etc., etc. And that information is going to be much more personalized to you. And where quite a lot of, quite a lot of people at Google, for example, will speak about becoming an agent. So looking at, it's not just providing a result, it's actually providing almost like the full service of kind of like a virtual assistant. So stuff like that, I think, is really important to understand, where do they want to go? And then if you can align, it's always been a case of, if you can align yourself with Google's roadmap, you probably won't go too far wrong. The challenge here is, it's not just Google at play.
Okay, so lots to unpick.
Yeah.
I mean, at the moment, maybe someone's listening and thinking, I've never tried Perplexity versus Google to search for a holiday. Maybe sort of bring that to life, that search, and just kind of talk us through what you typically see in the search results, and kind of what that means for someone who's appearing in the search results or not.
Yeah, and I think there's an example of, I think we've had a similar conversation with a client recently where their opinion is the demographic of their customers do not use AI. I would argue that you do, because you use Google and Google uses AI and it pulls that through into the results. So straight away, it's being aware of how this is used for that customer. So it's not necessarily that you have to use Perplexity in order for, if you don't use Perplexity, AI is off the table because Google are using that. So I would assume that most businesses, Google is a touch point within that customer journey. So I think that's the first point. And then it's really difficult to get data around usage of where your brand appears right now. There are some tools on the market, but I think it only really scratches the surface right now in terms of what is truly measurable. So yeah, I think it's kind of early stages of figuring that out. I would suggest, certainly from an agency perspective, I found just actually almost forcing myself a little bit to use Perplexity has got me into it, because then I found, okay, well, this is useful. And now if I can find how it's useful for me, I can then to start to understand use cases of how clients would use it if I was put in their shoes. So I would challenge people to do that for now. Um, Whereas SEO, like I say, it's kind of 20 years down the line. There's a lot in SEO that you can reverse engineer by looking at the data and going backwards. This is so new, it's quite difficult to do that. So I think it really is those early testing phases of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and then unpicking it as you go along.
Talk us through that process of looking backwards currently. You know, you said that at the moment it's difficult with sort of using LLMs, but how traditionally has that been done?
If I talk about it from an SEO standpoint, you could look at, you'll have keyword research tools. You could see how much people are searching for particular search terms in comparison to others. So you can see this is how much demand there is around a keyword, or kind of more recent years that's been spoken about more as topics rather than specific keywords. But you can understand, okay, well, what's the opportunity that we have on the table to grow? And then you can turn that into a forecast, and ideally a revenue forecast of, okay, well, now we know the value of that opportunity that we can get. And then working backwards, you can audit your site's performance against competitors and say, they're number one. These are the key factors. This is what they're doing well. That means that they deserve to be number one. This is where we rank against them. And here are the top things that we need to do to close the gap between where we are now and where those market leaders sit. And that traditionally has been quite a solid way. And I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but it's kind of quite a solid data driven way of saying this is how you build an SEO strategy. Certainly, if you're not market leader, it's if you're trying to catch someone, that gives you almost a bit of a blueprint in terms of what you need to do to increase your market share and equally know what the value is. If you ask me right now, what's the value in a brand to invest in ranking in AI search engines, it's so difficult that it's hard to even give an estimate, let alone an accurate number, because you just don't know the scale of, firstly, where this is today is very hard.
Yeah.
And then if you were to amplify that by where could this be in 12 months and beyond, also extremely difficult.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a specific question, and this is coming from someone that doesn't know an awful lot about SEO, but I was using Google Notebooks LM the other day, which allows you to create a notebook and update sort of various external resources, including PDFs, website URLs, audio, anything. And then you're able to it's kind of a closed loop, and then you're able to ask questions and it will give citations like Perplexity. And I noticed that I was trying to access certain website URLs and upload them. Some uploaded perfectly and some didn't, and they were blocked. And there was it didn't seem like there was any rhyme or reason why they weren't being pulled through. And I can only imagine that, you know, the owner of the website has put some kind of block on AI accessing them. So this might be a really dumb question, but can you just talk us through, you know, is your thoughts on that?
I actually don't know, is my honest
Okay.
answer. I
Okay.
think it's, again, talking from a traditional SEO perspective, you have what is called a robots.txt file on your website, which basically tells a crawler you will allow search engines and you might block specific ones. My guess from what you're explaining is that people have blocked AI in terms of maybe it's specific platforms of saying Perplexity cannot access data from our site. And there's a number of reasons that you might want to do that. It could be the server load in terms of what's coming through, or you just might not want to be surfaced in AI results for various reasons. So I think the answer is likely they have blocked it. But there might be, like I've used Gemini, for example, to try to summarize videos on YouTube. I might not want to watch a whole hour's worth of a video, but I might want to get a one pager on what were the key points that I could skim read. And it's great for that because Google own YouTube. But if you try to do that on a URL that is not a YouTube video, then at this stage, the example I used at least, it wasn't able to do that. So again, it's kind of who owns that property and who has access to being able to, yeah, kind of turn that into an AI result is a tricky one to navigate as well at this stage.
Yeah. And for example, the Harvard Business Review, understandably, some of their content is gated, and therefore, you wouldn't expect necessarily that URL would be able to, or the LLM or whichever search engine you're using wouldn't be able to access their content. But it just struck me as curious. So when do companies typically block? And what you're saying is you can block specifically different platforms. It's not a blanket block.
Yeah, that's right. You can say you would block specific platforms, or you can either allow everything, you can disallow everything, or you can itemize who's kind of disallowed so that you can block them. And that would be the way that it'd work. Um, and again, I think to link this back to one of your previous questions in terms of everyone's kind of approach to AI at this stage, because it's so new, it is very different. So we've got two very similar clients, and in their contracts, in one of them, they have, under no circumstances should you use AI in order to provide any of your work. And that's something that, again, there might be circumstances where we may have to request that, okay, well, this is useful for you, but we'd show them the reason why we're doing that. And to be honest, I'm sure we would do that anyway, but they are very kind of explicit that they don't want AI involved in the delivery of their services. We have another contract that is more procurement led, and they want us to be able to use AI and other technologies in order to provide efficiencies to our workflows and processes so that over time they can see a cost saving on how we're basically getting better at what we're doing. It shouldn't be this takes us the same amount of time as it did 2 years ago. We should be getting quicker, better, and more efficient through the advancement of technology alongside that. So I think that's just a good example to show how different brands have different viewpoints. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer at this stage. I think it has to be aligned with that company, the way they work, their values, and the way that they see them working as an organization. But again, that would be factored into, do they actually want to surface in these results at this stage or not as well?
Okay, so lots to dive into. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about pricing as you're talking there about procurement coming in, sort of say we want to see efficiencies in how long things take, and your internal efficiencies. How are you using AI? Talk us through how are you using AI internally?
Yeah, so we have within our team, we have a number of different areas of our workflows that we're looking at how we can provide AI efficiencies to, again, just be better at what we're doing. And I would say that those are kind of more at the research phases. So we're not using it, for example, to create copy for websites. Um, that said, I think we might have done some experimentation around using it for like search snippets and stuff like meta descriptions, those types of things, where um, doing experiments around how that can work without negatively affecting your rankings. It's about providing efficiencies and having the same quality. So that's kind of the top level guiding principle, if you like, in terms of what we're trying to do is maintain human led quality. But if you can provide efficiencies, then that's certainly beneficial. And to give you one specific example, I think we've been using this for probably about 18 months, maybe a couple of years now, but we previously used to have an SEO strategist that would take our keyword research and they would turn that into a brief for a writer to then create a page of content. And on average, that took around 15 minutes per page to create that brief for a writer who then goes away and creates the content for that. We've now managed to largely automate that using AI. It's still human edited and quality controlled, but they don't need to go in and write the whole brief. It's something that you can take. We've done the keyword research. This is the theme of the content, and you can line that up with brand guidelines, tone of voice, etc., and just make sure that the writers are then aware of what they need to do. But you can almost take out one of the middle steps, or at least make it more efficient, so that the effort is then focused more on the action, the implementation, as opposed to the background prep.
Absolutely brilliant example, actually. And I've spoken to many agencies that are kind of saying a similar thing. Which tools do you typically use in the agency? Do you use a myriad of different ones, or do you stick to the same one?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm the wrong person to ask on this, because I've
It just all
largely
gets
kept.
done.
I can tell you the top level of what we do and why we do it, but how we do
Detail.
it, I've left that to the team. So I know there's different tools and technologies that we'll bring in, and it could be different APIs, for example. But yeah, that's where there's people much smarter than me in terms of
Fair enough.
how to
Fair
set
enough.
that up.
So it's really curious that you say that, two different companies, two different clients have completely different views. And I think this is what we're also hearing currently, right where we are right now. What advice would you give for agencies that are navigating this space? Perhaps there are some SEO agencies out there listening to you, or, bigger sort of full service digital agencies that also have an SEO arm. What advice would you give to them about, where they're at now and the kinds of conversations that they perhaps could be having that maybe they're not?
So again, it's everyone has. If you looked at this as almost like a sliding scale of 0 to 10, it's not like a yes or no. I think it's just how far do you want to go with this. For me, I think it's a bit more than dip your toe in, but it's certainly not an 8 out of 10 plus. I think it's something where, if I was to look at this from an SEO perspective, I don't see the future being an AI driven agency, but I think an AI enabled agency for me is where I would kind of draw the line. I think having the efficiencies in what you're doing and being able to surface insight and research that can help to influence your strategy, that's extremely important. I think letting AI loose in this is what you're doing, how you're doing it, and like basically replacing 10 to 15 years worth of experience in a strategist, for example, with an AI program feels something that to me is very high risk and I wouldn't advise on doing. But that said, that 0 out of 10 of, well, let's just do it how we've always done it, feels quite naive as well. So I think my advice is for agencies to experiment, to understand whether it's on their own website, their own projects, some clients that they're willing to have a conversation with and maybe provide work at a more efficient rate, in terms of saying we're going through a learning curve, we want to try this together with you. I think it's worth experimenting at this stage and seeing what you can do. I mean, I wouldn't advise on trying to break too much. It's more at this stage, I think, how do you provide efficiencies? How do you look at, could you improve your visibility within AI driven results and LLMs? That has to be a positive, but equally if it's 10% of budget, that probably feels about right. If it's, kind of anything north of 20%, unless there's a real business case of you have to be in this space right now, and this is going to destroy you if you're not the first to get there, then there's probably not that level of urgency.
Brilliant. Great advice. So, account managers, they are leading these conversations some of the time, others depending on what your agency business model is. Talk us through, you mentioned there, increase your visibility with LLMs. Can you kind of give us like an approach to how you would initiate the conversation with your client, but also kind of talk them through what that looks like?
I think it is, to a large extent, going back a step of what we were saying about earlier of how do you understand your customer? How is that customer searching in a way that can lead them to purchasing a product from you? And then what are the things that will influence them across that journey? And there'll be any marketing will always tell you there's multiple touch points at play. SEO is never done in a silo. I mean, people might like to think that when you have that journey of awareness, consideration, conversion, it's all done in a search engine. It's not. There's different things at play in terms of what will be clicks and subscribe to, etc., etc. And LLMs are part of that. So again, just understanding what that full picture is and how you can influence it, I think is really important. And having that, trying to get out of the bubble of just being within one channel, I think sometimes can be helpful. So how do you understand, okay, well, people are searching over here. They have brand recognition in terms of the publishers that you're featured on, for example, as well as on your own sites, that content. And then understanding that bigger picture, you can then say, okay, well, your customers, just from a search perspective, are searching in Google. They're also searching in Perplexity, etc. And like I said earlier, there might be retail search, there could be social search, there's other platforms at play as well. And showing them that bigger picture of, okay, well, if you can capture people here, for me, I would see LLMs are very much more the research phase. And that is extremely valuable because if you're not surfaced in the research phase, you might not make it to that conversion phase because you've already been filtered out to a point that you're not considered. So I think just trying to have that conversation with clients about this is how people are making decisions. You want to make sure that you've captured that whole funnel in the best way possible. This is something else to think about. And then you can start to understand the value behind it of what you were to do, if you were to do that, what that looks like. And equally, sometimes, as you know, it can be more powerful to look at what's the opportunity cost if you were not to do this? What if you didn't do this, but your competitors did do this? And those types of conversations quite often, in a backwards way, will inspire people or spur them on to take a bit more action because they don't want to be left behind.
So another newbie, naive question, but let's suppose you ran some analytics for a company website, and you realise that amongst other channels like social channels, different publisher channels, Google searches, there was a high, find rate via one or two LLMs. So you're seeing that actually people are hitting your website as a result of coming from a search that was initiated in something like Perplexity. What does that tell you, and what would you do to kind of optimize for that? Because clearly something's working.
It certainly tells you that it's an important part of their decision process in terms of how they end up on your website, which is certainly a signal of, okay, well, you want to start spending more attention there. I think the challenge quite often isn't that they can see it's working. It's if they're not listed, they probably don't value what the opportunity would look like if they were to be listed. And equally, like we said earlier, how much is that going to be amplified by in terms of potential future usage? Because the popularity is increasing month on month in terms of number of searches. So Google is very much, and has been for a while, quite static in terms of if you're getting 1,000 searches a month for a specific keyword, there might be seasonality applied month on month, but in general, that volume probably isn't going up that much year on year. Whereas in these types of platforms, if you're getting 100 visits a month right now, you might downplay it, but that could be 10,000 in a year. You don't know. So I think there's that side of things to consider. I think, again, if you then turn this into, okay, well, what do you do about it? It is kind of reverse engineering, and it is, again, almost like SEO back to basics in terms of the early days. I did a search a couple of weeks ago on best SEO agencies in the UK, and out of 10 that appeared in AI-driven results, I'd probably heard about 2 of those. And I don't consider myself that out of touch. And, I feel like I try not to spend too much time thinking about competition, but equally, I would have expected to have heard of a higher percentage than what came back. And to me, firstly, I think there's a lack of quality in those results. But secondly, well, if people are using this in order to find information, not just agencies, but my example earlier of how to book a holiday, if that is influencing people genuinely, then you would want to find a way to become one of those results. So most of, if not all of these platforms show the sources that they are pulling this information from when you do a search. So really it's kind of unpicking, okay, well, if these are the sources that are found within these searches, so Google, it might be very much you rank in the top 10 of Google, so they're collating almost like a one pager on what's a summary of the top 10 results, for example. Um, Whereas Perplexity, it could be these are the trusted sources and publishers that they would go to within a specific niche in order to build examples around, so travel, it could be Condé Nast magazine or something like that. What have they said are the top destinations to go to in 2025? That would make sense. Um, but you can see those sources and then you can reverse engineer and unpick, okay, well, if this is what's being recommended, how do we become listed on that source so that we get pulled into an LLM? And then that is the process. And like I say, that will evolve over time. And I think the quality of the results will get better over time. But for now, it's really understanding the mechanics of how it works and how you get surface as a result within those LLMs.
That's really useful. Thank you so much for sharing. That makes total sense now that you're saying that. Um, and is it manual at the moment? Like, do you have to go and look at those sources manually, or is there, advancements that are happening in terms of how you can access that information really quickly and do some kind of retrospective kind of analysis of it?
That's actually a really good question. I think, again, because of the level of maturity of AI versus SEO, if it's SEO, the comparison would be you could see the backlinks that a competitor has had, so what publishers are writing about them, and then you can again kind of build a picture of, oh, all of our competitors are listed on these publishers and here's some gaps that we don't have. Let's start to build coverage on those sites because that will build our authority and reputation. That helps you to build within SEO. To my knowledge, you don't really have anything like that within LLMs at this stage. I could see it certainly going that way, but I think it is right now a manual process of actually, if you were to do a series of queries, what are those top sources that are listed? And then how do you become, yeah, kind of something that it either becomes the source itself, or how do you get listed and piggyback off of those sites that are being pulled in as a source?
So useful. Thank you so much. I'm curious, how is Google responding to all of this change, this kind of emergence of all of these different LLMs? I haven't been very close to it. You have. So give us a kind of a top line. How is this all
I'm
transpiring?
The first thing that came to mind is an analogy that I'm sure you've had and probably used a lot of times in terms of client service, but it's the swan metaphor of the swan is gliding across on top of the water very calmly and the legs are kicking away underneath very fiercely. And I think that's probably Google right now in terms of AI. I think they have from the outward perspective, a very clear destination of where they want to get to and what this looks like and how their different technologies and Gemini and everything else will come together in order to provide the best experience. I think underneath the surface, they're figuring out a lot as they go along in a area that has huge investment. It's fiercely competitive and everyone's kind of watching each other, copying each other, and going for that land grab and trying to figure it out as they go along. So I think there is a lot of test, learn, how much are you willing to lose from an investment perspective in order to win that land grab right now, and then bring it together kind of further down the line. I would imagine some people might have a timeline on what that looks like and where it goes. And I know like some of the technology, Google, this would have been probably about 18 months ago. I remember Google's initial, I think this was the initial demo of Gemini was how you could get it to, I think it's like order a food delivery or book you a haircut or something like that over the phone using AI technology. And it's like stuff like that. You can see where they want to go with this. I'm not quite sure it's there yet, but again, it's outwardly you're almost talking about where it can be before the technology is fully there. So I think there's a bit of a gap that they need to close as well in terms of building the quality or the reliability of how that works too.
Do you know anything about what they're expecting to be able to do versus the other platforms like OpenAI, obviously, and Anthropic's Claude? And do, what's their aspiration, or have they not made it explicitly clear?
I think from a Google perspective, it's always been around trying to bring together all of the information on the web. So I think for them, it's probably doubling down on their own USPs and the information that they have through the search engine. That's their strength against everyone else. They are able to, they've got the best index of content available on the web, and then it's how do they build that into their AI results and make it more seamless as an experience. And equally, they have the market share, so it's kind of they have the brand, everything else that goes with it. It's trying to evolve that into the next generation of how people are using that platform. And it's very much playing to their strengths of what they've got to build on that against competitors who don't have that. That said, sometimes you get disruption where it's can be an advantage to not have the legacy of what you did before in order to do what you want to do in the future and not feel held back by that. So I'm sure if you were to ask that question to Perplexity or ChatGPT, they might say that actually we're building this from the ground up and we're doing this around the way that people will need. So they're all play to their own strengths and USPs in different ways. And it will be very interesting just to see how that starts to play out. And I think, again, it goes back to user and searcher behaviors. If people are switching from Google to Perplexity as a good example, then the answer in terms of what that future looks like is you'll probably see a shift in terms of market share of one going up and the other one going down. But yeah, it's too early to say at this stage.
You might not be a betting man, but any predictions? I know I'm not. I won't hold you to it.
Um, I think what you'll see over time is I think you will get a market leader. I think we've seen with Google, Bing hasn't historically been bad, but if you're second best, then people just use the one that they see as being the best one, and then that market share takes over. I remember reading an article years ago about how whatever the second biggest auction site was not that much worse than eBay. No one can tell you what the second biggest auction site is because eBay had the brand, had the user base, and then that leads into more inventory, and it's almost a flywheel if then everyone starts using that, and then they just grow in terms of popularity over time, and the other one starts to fade away. My prediction is you'll start to see a shift in. At the moment, everyone's probably figuring out actually how do these things work, what are the differences, and which ones do they prefer. And I think you'll start to see, kind of maybe it's through acquisition, maybe it's not, maybe it's just some will fall away and others will grow. But I think there will be a market leader. If I was to bet on this, I actually think Google is still quite well placed. And there's a lot of people who are saying Google are going to fall away. I think, again, going back to the customer question, I don't think you can satisfy all of a customer's stages of what they need purely through AI. I think you need a combination of AI is very useful in different areas, like that comparison example. I think when it comes to, I just want to see a product page and information that's more transactional, that might be where Google's web search is more powerful. So I'm not saying you can't get that through AI, but I think there might be a place for Google to have a more rounded experience overall. So I would certainly, in terms of odds, I would say Google would be my odds on favorite, but who knows? If I feel like with stuff like this, if you knew how it's going to play out, we'd all be billionaires.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's so
so
true.
so no one knows for sure, but yeah, I think it's certainly looking at those shifts closely of what happens month on month, and certainly when you look back year on year, that's where you can start to see, okay, well, this is where there might be a shift in those hands.
Yeah. Kevin, this has been so enlightening. Thank you so, so much for joining me and sharing so many insights and so many tips. For those listening, just if anyone's listening and they would like to talk to you, who would you like to hear from, and what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things for me. Certainly, brands who are looking to navigate AI in the landscape is certainly helpful. I'm certainly happy to share my opinions, and likewise with agency owners as well. I've had a lot of conversations with people where we are trying to figure this out together. So yeah, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. So certainly connect with me there and feel free to send me a message, and I'm happy to pick it up. Also, Jenny, I feel like we should probably do this in 12 months because it's changing so quickly. It would be quite interesting to then pick apart everything I've got wrong. So
Right, let's
yeah,
make a date. You're invited back on in a year's time, Kevin, and we're going to revisit this topic and
that's
see
it.
what the hell's changed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome.
Brilliant, Kevin. I'm just going to press stop and hope that I